and welcome to Office Hours for another special topic session. In these sessions, we do a bit of show and tell, as well as answering your questions. So today we're going to talk about event management apps, or apps to manage your events. And we have a terrific team to guide us through this session who've got lots of hands-on experience of a range of solutions that are available. Thank you very much indeed, panel, for making the time to be with us today. And I just want to remind all of you that none of us work for Salesforce.org. These sessions are run by the Hub community, and we all volunteer our time and our talents to share Salesforce knowledge with you. So as usual, if you have questions, please post them in the chat first. But remember, today we're talking about event management apps. So we're happy to take questions about the specific apps we're discussing. By all means, put those in chat. But we're also, I think, going to talk a little bit more in a kind of general way about the options that are available and give you some pointers about which apps you might choose to fit your requirements. Since there are lots of you on the call and a little bit of background noise already, I'd be grateful if you'd mute your mic, please, unless you're answering a question or sharing a tip, of course. And if you're not a presenter and you want to speak, if you could get my attention in chat first, and then I'll call on you to come and chat. So to give you an idea of what we'd planned to talk about today, our agenda, we were going to talk just briefly about what features are already in Salesforce and or the MPSP to help you manage events, why you might need another app. And then we've kind of, the third-party apps are sort of split into two. There are those that you can install directly into Salesforce, such as Click and Pledge events. I think we might manage, we're going to talk about Linbio events, maybe Soapbox Engage and Fontiva. And then there are those apps that you manage outside of Salesforce and require an integration with Salesforce. Kalman is going to show us around CVent, and Barbara's going to talk about Eventbrite. Those are the main two there. And then we're going to look at, if those don't really fit the bill, how you might create your own app, maybe using a form building tool and a payment processor. One more thing, and then I'll stop talking and hand over to the panel. We're going to focus today on apps that manage a range of events, like sort of workshops, conferences, or classes, that kind of general events that a lot of you do. We're also aware that there are apps that fit more specialist needs. Sorry, I will do a bit of muting now. Yeah, sorry, Olivia, that was you. So one more thing, we're going to focus today on a range of apps, as I say, on these more generalist apps. We are aware that there are apps that fit specialist needs, like ticketing for arts organisations or museums, for example, and apps for fundraising auctions. If we have time at the end, we'll kind of mention some of those names, but as I say, we're going to stick mostly to the generalist ones. So let's start with Salesforce itself. So panel, I mean, there's a standard object, I think, in Salesforce called events, and there are campaign features. So why can't you use those? I mean, why would you even need to think about having another app for events? There's an awkward question.
Well, let's start with saying that it's not that you can't use them. There are cases where campaign management for those smaller one-offs, if you don't have a lot of formal events, could work. And you'll find that some of these event tools that we're going to discuss actually uses campaign and campaign memberships as part of their tools. So it's not that you can't use it, it's when that internal piece no longer works for what you need. You either have much more involved events, or you're using campaigns for just way too many things and it's becoming too horrendous to try to manage, that you want to move to an event tool. So it's not that you can't use them, it's that sometimes you have more need than what's in the built-in, is what I would say.
And events, yeah, sorry, I was going to say, because events in Salesforce aren't really kind of events as most of you are probably thinking of either, are they? Please go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, right. Yeah, the event object is more about, it's almost like calendaring. It's not necessarily managing groups of people to do things, but campaigns, as TJ said, can be used. I see, I could think of using campaigns a lot for something where you don't need to collect ticket information and money online that needs to be synced into Salesforce somehow. The apps, in fact, do use campaigns a lot of times for that, but if out of the box, that doesn't exist. So if it's an event where you're just setting up a house party and doing all your invites by, paper mail and managing it all by hand, there's no money exchange as part of the ticket, that might be a place where campaigns become kind of useful. But it is really small because it is mostly managed by hand.
Okay, so we're getting towards if you have more sort of detailed requirements, and as TJ said, you may be using campaigns for lots of different things. And yeah, the money piece is a big one, isn't it? And how people register for this campaign. So I was just going to show on the screen, because a kind of a great place to start, and I know you said we should feature this, shouldn't we, TJ, is there's a great spreadsheet that I think Ashima is on the line. Ashima Sehgal started this sheet. It's a community curated one, and is a list of lots of the apps that are available to do event management. You can find it in the event management group in the Power of Us hub. So it's interesting, there's lots of things out there, but as I said, they sort of split, don't they, into roughly into sort of two groups, and there are things that you can install into Salesforce, and then there are ones that are much better run externally and have some kind of integration. So shall we talk a little bit about ones that you install into Salesforce? Panel, what kind of experience have you had? What about these apps? Do they work well? What are your recommendations?
I think each app has its own quirks, and unfortunately, your best bet for understanding whether an app is going to work for you is either a demo, and most of them will do a demo online or have pre-recorded demo videos, and then making sure you do a little discovery to truly understand what it is you need before you launch into searching for an app. Even among your staff, ask what type of information is needed, and what you want to collect, what you want to be able to analyze in the future, and make sure you understand that going in. Of the apps that live in Salesforce, Click and Pledge and Linvio, that I've had the most experience with. They both are clunky in their own ways. There's a learning curve for all of them. I would say Click and Pledge setup can be a little challenging for admins. I don't know if people have experience with the Click and Pledge app for donations. It just takes a little learning. It takes getting used to how it's set up. It's not a sort of click and go. What I found, and it can do simple events up to session events where you have multiple sessions per an event. Same thing with Linvio. They both can do that sort of sessioning for things like conferences. Neither can get crazy complicated. They couldn't run Dreamforce on Linvio or Click and Pledge, but they can do some of that. But they're both a little bit clunky. That said, Click and Pledge is one of the better integrations for, at least for their donation processing. Their integration is really solid. It's very well supported. People love it and hate it all at the same time. And then Linvio, I have Linvio up if anybody needs to look at it. I put it in a sandbox. It's older. It needs some upgrading. It isn't being actively developed as much as I would like. The clients I have that use it, when they have problems, it's a little challenging to get fixes. They're just a little slow. And it's all CSS driven. You need real CSS skills if you want it to match your website and you want it to look nice. They will do an initial match your template for you, but after that, anything you want to tweak on the form, you have to have some CSS skills because it uses sites in the back end. I don't want to dive too far in unless people are interested in looking at Linvio. It is a little clunky.
And I love that you mentioned that they're both clunky, and not just clunky, but they can be data hogs. They have the back end of them are kind of messy looking. They have lots and lots and lots of objects because they live in Salesforce and trying to do everything in Salesforce. So there's no processing outside of Salesforce and then pushing the nice data into Salesforce. So there's lots of objects. They're both very object heavy, custom objects. And because of that, they can eat data because for one registration record, you might have 4 or 5 other back-end records that created that one registration record. So you'll need to have some sort of regular maintenance in place to purge some of that background data that just makes the applications work. And for a lot of organizations, that's fine, but just be aware going into those that it can be on the back end a little bit challenging as well, just to do the daily upkeep because there's just so much going on in the background.
Oh,
and
yeah.
of course,
you've got sort of people within the registration. You've got the kind of people who are attending, haven't you, and what their preferences might be, and then there's all the stuff to do around the transaction as well.
Custom questions and
yeah.
I guess the flip side of that is because there's all this structure in Salesforce, they are compared to something like Eventbrite, where it's a platform outside of Salesforce, so you don't have that awesome admin control of the objects and what it's asking. It's maybe more customizable, but like Linvio, to a point, is pretty customizable in terms of the types of questions you can ask on the form and what object it feeds back to. And same with Click and Pledge. You have a little more flexibility in terms of what you can ask on your forms, where the data ends up. It just may be a little bit more customizable there, where some of the integrations, like from Eventbrite, the customization is pretty slim. So it's a trade-off, I guess. You have to make that decision.
So Elizabeth has asked us an interesting question, and then Keith's asked one about cost, and there we go. The question from Elizabeth, and I think we should remember this question and apply it later when we talk about the integration. She says, do they create duplicate records in Salesforce? I assume she means duplicate contact records. How do you manage that or prevent that happening?
Click and Pledge has built-in matching on certain fields. You can sort of a little bit customize your matching, like match on street address, match on email address, but Click and Pledge also uses this thing called an alias record, where it doesn't always overwrite data. You have to overwrite the data by hand. Like it'll say, oh, I've got a little bit different name and address, but the email matches, and you told me to match on email. See, there's a little widget you can use to overwrite. Linvio also has email, very simple email first name matching. I don't think it goes beyond that. So it tries, but Click and Pledge is a little more customizable.
Yeah, and Click and Pledge also has a fully manual matching, where you have the option to manually review and link things. So every link or sync may create duplicates. Both of the systems have pieces in place to try to minimize that. Click and Pledge is a little bit more robust than the two, but there's still going to be some duplicates that slide in where, maybe the first name doesn't match exactly, or the last name and the email aren't the same. And so it'll create duplicates. So there'll still be some sort of duplicate management that you have to do regularly, as you would with anything else. But there are some pieces in place to try to limit that, but it still will create duplicates no matter what you try to do.
I think it's one of the hazards, isn't it, of any kind of online registration. As soon as you're allowing people to give you their data through some kind of online process, you immediately sort of start to hit those sort of issues, don't you, where they might register with their with an abbreviated first name, whereas what you've got on the contact is their full first name, or they just make typos, or they just choose another email address or whatever.
And multiple emails, that's my favorite.
Yeah. Or you have two, couples that share an email. That always causes fun and excitement. So the other, we're moving down the line a little bit, but Classy, I will note, actually has adopted Salesforce's duplicate management as their matching tool. You can use the rules you build in Salesforce duplicate management for finding your matches, and that has helped my client who uses Classy immensely with dupes. It's not perfect. It will never be perfect, but that's something that he likes a lot about Classy, is that using those rules, because they're more customizable.
So that's great. While we're on that, yes, to just go back, because Robin had posted about Linvio being challenging, and thank you, Ashima, for sort of digging into that a little bit. It goes back to what you were saying, TJ. Robin's saying that it's the number of objects that Linvio has. It's a little difficult for staff to know all of the things that need to be updated, and that also they've created a holding account for their dupes that are created during the registration, and then they manage that manually. But yeah, I guess you could use, again, you could create that holding account, I guess, using some matching rules, couldn't you? Do matching rules. So.
And with all the apps that are even the clunkier apps, what I find is really helpful is for admins to create base templates for their staff to use. If your staff are the ones spinning up events, so these apps that have all the complications like Click and Pledge or like Linvio, I found a really helpful way to do this is you make these base templates and people just clone them. Like if you have a generic type of event that happens multiple times a year, then all they have to do is plug in the name, plug in, a couple of new settings, and it's made life easier for them. And that's worked a lot with a really busy client I have that has 3, sub-admins spinning up events all the time.
So we've got a good question about the Eventbrite integration. We are going to come on to that, Olivia, a little later. There was a question from Keith about pricing. So wants to know if any of these are free. Haha,
free like puppies. Technically, the Eventbrite integration, the app that Eventbrite has but no longer supports, is free, but Eventbrite has recently changed their pricing model. They're starting to upsell in a weird way, as Kalman says, that I haven't quite wrapped my head around. It used to be that there was one pricing model and tickets cost, you just charged extra on top, but now they have these tiers for the types of tickets you can offer. If all you're doing is offering one ticket type, it's cheaper. As you start to be able to use an add-on donation or a set multiple ticket types, it gets more expensive per ticket. So the Eventbrite side of things is not free, but technically the link to Salesforce is free.
What about Click and Pledge? Any costs there?
They charge. They have a monthly fee unless you go with a partner to install it. If you have a Click and Pledge partner, like a couple of us here are probably Click and Pledge partners, you get the monthly fee deducted, and then there's a per transaction fee, like 35 cents plus 3% or something.
Yeah, it's another one of those where the application is free. You can install it, but then to use it, you have to pay. You have to use their payment processor. That's where they make their money, is that percentage of any monies that you collect. So the app itself is free, but then if you want to use it, then you actually have to sign up and start paying.
What about Linvio? I believe Linvio is more in the sort of setup costs, isn't it?
It's an annual fee.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to check what the annual fee. When I installed it for the nonprofit I was working at 6 years ago, it was like $750 a year. It has gone up since then. I will see. I'll post in the hub afterward what the annual fee is, and it also might depend on your volume, but plus processing costs. And then the nice thing about Linvio is you can pick your merchant service, so you can go with Authnet or you can go with CyberSource, or to a point they have a list that you can choose from. Where some of these you're sort of stuck in the processor that they will work with, or Click and Pledge is your processor.
Yeah. Anybody got any experience? Sorry, you were going to say something else.
Well, I was just going to.
Go ahead, Kalman.
Just regarding Linvio, it's been a few years since I actually looked at it, but one thing that was striking to me was the UI. Just wasn't so pretty, and I'm thinking when you have potential donors or people coming to an event, the first thing you want them to see is some really nice page that they're going to want to engage with. So that was one sour point for me, where the UI has not really changed so much. It is on sites. There's extensibility there. There's some setup, but I think for me the UI just threw it off my list pretty quickly because of that.
You need someone with some pretty skillful CSS skills, and even then you're limited. You can only change the if people don't know what a Salesforce site is, it's a public facing website that Salesforce hosts for you, and Linvio uses that. You have a template where you can change what the outside, around your form looks like, and you can sometimes adjust form fields a little bit, like where they live on the page, but in general Linvio just plops a generic form down into the center of your template, and that part's kind of ugly, but you control everything around it, or what the fonts look like. But yeah, it's not as pretty as, say, Classy, which is the prettiest out there probably, I think.
So yeah,
I'll give a shout out to Soapbox too. It's pretty.
Yeah, they've done a lot in Soapbox lately to make it look much better.
Yeah. Yes, let's just briefly talk a little bit about Soapbox, because that's another alternative, isn't it? And again, I believe Soapbox has an annual fee, which is kind of based on how many bits of Soapbox you use, isn't it? Because there are quite a few elements in it. Yeah. Okay. But that one's also very tightly integrated, isn't it? And I think it has slightly fewer custom objects.
Yes, and the one thing I always want to point out with Soapbox is that it uses leads. So it uses the Salesforce web to lead functionality to get folks in the system. And so the leads get automatically converted to contacts for you. But if for some reason it doesn't match the contacts and it can't do it quite right, where there might be more than one contact with that email or with that name, it leaves it as a lead so that you can manually figure out who it should go to. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so they just have these leads sitting in leads. And they may have contacts that are the same and they just never actually manage that. So one thing with this, always want to point out, is that you will have to put some sort of lead review process in place for those ones that it can't figure out how to process.
That's great.
Yeah, that's
a great tip. Thank you.
And if you're dealing with large events, that becomes relatively onerous pretty quickly, I find. But small events, a couple hundred people is probably not a big deal.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the nice thing about Soapbox is it does almost entirely use native Salesforce objects and is built to integrate with NPSP. It's not like a secondary thought. They built it to integrate with NPSP, so it's pretty seamless there, which is really nice that it doesn't add a bunch of junk.
Yeah, and you have options of payment processors. There's several options for payment processors to use. And of course, it's not just that one thing. You can do donations. It's right there: donations, events, form, directories, shops, petitions. And then it also has a kind of a pseudo login, so that folks could log in to update their own information or see what events they're signed up for and edit their own information. So it's a great a la carte system of, oh, we want this and this. And then if you need more, you can just build on top of it. So I love that you only pay for what you need instead of getting all these things like Click and Pledge. You get everything. And you have all these objects in your system, and whether or not you use them, they're there. But this, you only use those pieces and you install those pieces that you actually want and use. So I do like that about this. And it is very pretty. It makes amazing web pages, really easy to use for donors and registrants. They have cool graphics that you could use, of like thermometers on your campaign pages of how far you are. So they put a lot of effort into what it looks like, so it actually looks really professional on the front end.
And there are setup costs with Soapbox if you want them to do your templating for you to make your site look gorgeous, just so you know.
Yeah, and make sure to scroll down to the nonprofit pricing.
That was because somebody had asked us how much it cost, and I thought, well, we'll just click to the page. There you go, Rachel. Lisa, this is one of the Soapbox is one of the ones that you install within Salesforce. We're going to get on to the integrations in a minute. And yes, yeah, that's a good point, Katie. Katie has said that she thinks that Soapbox Event has a custom object called tickets, but everything else is managed natively, so within campaigns and opportunities. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes opportunities can be the one that kind of is a bit difficult to integrate with. So yeah, much lighter footprint than Click and Pledge, which has about 30. She's right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Tony is just to go back to what you were saying about sites, Barbara, and he's also saying, do any of these offer components that could be dropped into a community, a public-facing community?
Not that I know of as of yet. The CVent, Kalman?
That's a good question. So CVent standalone, so you can build.
Okay.
You can build and drop wherever you want to put it. That's a good question.
I would think you could build something with Linvio if you had the chops, but you'd have to build it yourself. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, okay. And anybody asking, will Soapbox Engage work with custom objects, or do you have to use the standard ones?
You have to use the standard, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
it doesn't have. That's Classy, which lives outside of Salesforce, has a bit of that functionality where you can choose to send the objects, what objects to send things to a point. It's limited, but there's some functionality there.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And going back to the community question, like if you're already using a community, it's not going to help you. But if you're looking for that community type of functionality, that pseudo type of login, Soapbox has that kind of functionality. I forgot what they call it. It's another add-on per month that gives you that login access to the data. So it's a pseudo community. If you go to pricing, it's on the pricing page, I think. It's one of the add-ons on the pricing, but it's an additional add-on. It's not directories yet because that just gives you the option. But
yes,
it gives you login functionality.
Yeah, I thought it was something to do with
user integration.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We'll give you that kind of login-y feel without being a full community. So if you're trying to get there but don't want to deal with a full community, Soapbox has that option.
Yes, it does. And there's interesting, and Click and Pledge has some peer-to-peer stuff as well, doesn't it? Which is, it doesn't really have a login, but you can do that sort of bits of fundraising and event inviting between groups. Sorry.
And I think Click and Pledge is the only. Oh no, Classy. Sorry, Classy has peer-to-peer, and then Click and Pledge. But of none, like Soapbox doesn't offer peer-to-peer. Linvio definitely doesn't. It was made before peer-to-peer was even a thing. I don't know about CVent, and I doubt CVent does. But this is about events more than peer-to-peer. So.
Yeah. Okay, so all right, so there are some good options. There are some things that you can install into Salesforce, but it's interesting. We've been talking about the things that it offers and some of the more sort of the limitations of them. So I suppose is one of the strengths of having a kind of an application that sits outside of Salesforce and then has an integration, just that you can be much more kind of sophisticated in how you manage the event. I'm kind of coming towards, because I realize, Kalman, I know you were going to talk about CVent, and I think one of the big things about that is just it's much more sophisticated as an event management app, isn't it? And there are lots of things that you might not want to do necessarily within Salesforce, but you can do with the app itself. So shall we talk about CVent a little bit, and then we'll come back to Eventbrite?
Sure. Yeah, that's. I'm definitely not a CVent expert, but I have a decent amount of experience the last almost 4 years, and then previously I had implemented it at a few nonprofits when I was consulting. But yeah, I would say some of the strengths for CVent is the ability to have multi-day events with multi-track. So for example, if I'm a faculty member at the university, we use that a lot. So if you're faculty, you're going down one path. If you're a student, you go down another. If you're an alum, you go down another. So they have registration paths which is really nice. Of course, discounts. Their creation, you can use templates or you can upload your own HTML, CSS, very flexible. I would say on the event creation piece is awesome. When we talk about the integration to Salesforce, I would not call currently what they have as an integration, an actual integration. And I'll just point that out really quick, then I'll stop. We basically have 3 levels of AND logic for matching. So you can say first name matches first name, and last name matches last name, and email matches email. So that's really nice if you have 1 email field, but we have 6, I think, or 7. There's no OR logic for mapping. So we've had to do, it wasn't my project, I helped a bit with it, but we had to do some workarounds to figure out how to bring in all the people who are registering and then what to do with that information once it comes in. So we've done some custom code in the back end for it. So, but just to point out, the out-of-the-box integration is not so flexible. And I'm glad to show a couple test forms that I have up.
Oh, that would be great. Yes, please.
Let's do this. I will share.
Here we go. Great.
I'll just cover my dirty desktop. So here's a test event, right? So I can have different components on the page. If I select register, it's going to drop me down. You can add maps. You know, I can select tickets. This is a very straightforward one. It's more of their Express event, and you can see it in the URL. It's Express. There's also, you know, so you can see just different styling. You can add links to social. You can add plugins for your calendar. You can create widgets. You can do QR code scanning, check-in. Here's another one. This is not as pretty. Oops, it's not open for registration. So, and I'll just show you in CVent itself, if I'm looking at it, right? So this is one of those test events. These are all the different pages. You can display those or hide them. There's a lot of functionality here. And if I hover over here, these are all the settings, right? So you have the mobile website, registration settings, which I talked about, sending people down a registration path, barcodes, QR codes. On arrival is their application, which is awesome. You can check people in pretty quickly. You can add budgets, staff, tasks, speakers, documents, sessions, tracks. You can offer discounts. And of course, there's an API integration, push API integration, and also just a standard Salesforce integration. And I'm going very quickly, by the way. Web links, widgets. You can add a calendar, social. And then here's your invitees, right? You can invite people right from here. So I'll say one thing that we're doing at the University of Colorado is we're not using CVent to send out the communications. What's really cool is I can basically have a list of, let's say, all of my donors from 2016 and 2017 and send them all an email with a link, and the link, assuming that they're in the CVent application, it can say, for example, are you Kalman? And you say yes, and then it pre-fills all your information. You can update it and change it, and then really quickly they can be registered, which is a really nice feature. We don't use that feature because we're sending emails through Marketing Cloud, so that's a different workflow for us completely. But there are some ways to streamline the registration process. Yeah, I'll stop there if there's any questions initially. It's expensive, so there's no question that CVent is pricey. I think they have great customer service. Our CSM is awesome. They're really engaged with us. A lot of great features, and I think still for 90, maybe 95% of our events, we probably don't need the complex functionality that they offer. But for those Like, for example, Conference of World Affairs is held at the University of Colorado here in Boulder. And that's a very complex event, multi-day, lots of speakers and lots of sessions, things like that, which makes it really nice and easy for people to attend the event, sign up, look in the mobile app and see who's speaking, see their profile, connect with people, etc. A lot of features.
And you can really see how nice the UI is, right, compared to building it in Salesforce and like a Salesforce record, like something like Linvio. That UI is gorgeous.
Kalman, can you talk a little bit about pricing? Because this can get a little pricey, and kind of what would that cutoff be that you would recommend of one of the smaller tools versus, you know, an event to be this size to warrant a CVent level app?
Yeah, so a good thing in my role currently is I don't do pricing and procurement. But, you know, honestly, I don't know. But we have...
That was a good dodge.
I mean, in the when we first started working with them, I remember looking at some of the pricing. It was a lot higher than I thought it was going to be. But we also have, I don't know, 130 users maybe. A lot of people sending out events. So contracts are based on attendees, if I remember correctly. So if you have people, or sorry, registrants, regardless if it's paid or not. So that makes it a little bit tricky. Another thing to watch out for is donations. It's not as straightforward to add a link to add a donation, for example, if you want to register for an event and then add an additional donation. It's a little bit of a workaround we had to work with CVent to figure out and implement. But yeah, honestly, for pricing, I would reach out to them, because I think it's going to be really different for a smaller organization. If you have, let's say, you know, 5 or 10 events a year, maybe 1 or 2 that's really complex. The pricing is obviously going to be a lot lower because the amount of people registering is just going to be lower.
Yeah, they usually do a flat amount per registrant, like a $1 to $2, and it might be less for nonprofits. I don't remember their last pricing that I talked to them, but it's like $150 plus a small percentage, like a 2% per attendee that signs up, and then the card fees on top of that. So it makes sense for like really big events, but if you're doing small, especially free or low dollar events, it may not make sense financially. So you really want to take a look at the pricing and how much you expect the tool to be used, because it may not be cost effective.
And I think, especially if you're using, for me, sessioning really makes CVent shine, right? Because it's one of the apps that does that really well. That this sort of, you know, big conferences with multiple sessions and people have to be able to sign up across multiple. It's the app that probably does that the best. Yeah,
and that's what I found in the analysis of different tools. You know, I really found, and this is putting the search for an event platform almost 4 years ago, when the last time I was really investigating and analyzing. So a lot has probably changed, but I didn't really find something in between CVent and, you know, even all the apps that we talked about earlier. There's really nothing in between. So there's a brilliant developer.
Like email platforms. You've got that middle range, and then you've got the super high expensive range, and there's no good in between. It's the same with the event platforms, where you're kind of small scale or giant scale and nothing good in between.
Yeah, interesting. That's great.
Could we?
So you're saying that one of the things is so for CVent, for these very complex events, but you did find that there are some complexities also to the integration, and that you had to do some workarounds to make the integration work well.
Yeah, and we, you know, just in a nutshell, what we've relied on is we can send all the data into Salesforce to wherever we want. We can send it to a custom object. We can send it to contacts, leads, dump it into one account or several accounts. And we're basically relying on our Salesforce expertise to parse it out and to figure out duplicates based on nightly jobs that are run to find, basically to search on every single email field in our system. Does this person already exist? And we're using Campaign. So CVent integration out of the box only uses Campaign and Campaign members for syncing, which for us it works great. You create the campaign and you create your CVent events, and then you sync them together, and then you can track different values. So for example, if someone registered or attended or no-showed, if they checked in, things like that. And then we can run metrics and do follow-ups. Again, we're not doing that inside CVent. I would say about 50% of the features that are baked into CVent are really around their email engine and the ability to harness what they've built there. And if you're not doing that like we are, then you are for sure missing out on a lot of the power of CVent.
Carolyn, if there's time, can we pin a conversation about the apps that offer in-person check-in features? I know somebody started talking about Swipe, like the kinds of features you might have at an event for checking in.
Okay.
That's maybe not important to everyone, but maybe pin that for the end if there's time.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I was going to ask the same thing.
Good. Well, I was thinking that we would move on. We'd already had some questions about Eventbrite, and I think we should talk about Eventbrite because it feels to me like that may be one of those ones that can sort of fit a little bit in the middle. Basically, kind of over to you, Barbara, and
Okay.
by all means, segue into whether Eventbrite also allows online check-in.
It is not allowing me to share my screen.
Hang on.
Am I not?
Let's hear it.
Well, Barbara figures that out for just a second before we switch over. If anyone's using Reg Online or was thinking about using Reg Online, CVent has acquired it and is kind of doing the Reg Online to CVent path, where if you have Reg Online, you can talk to them and they'll help you move over to CVent, just as an aside.
Cool.
Is my screen showing?
It is now, yes.
Okay. So Eventbrite, as many people know, is this really simple interface for building events. My clients, the staff on board, love Eventbrite. They love working in Eventbrite. It's super easy. The setup is great. When it comes to syncing to Salesforce, there is technically an app. It is offered on their website if you search for it by Eventbrite. A big caveat, it is no longer supported. I have found for the simplest of events, it is in fact, it works, and you'll hit a glitch here and there, but there's no one to contact if you need help. So you will in fact need to be a little savvy, or tenacious, whichever works for you. So the Eventbrite app, one couple things to note is you can only sync one account at a time. You can't have multiple Eventbrite accounts coming into Salesforce. This causes some issues if you have, like, say, multiple regions and you want to mark your events as having come from a specific region or come from a specific program. That will all have to happen in post-processing, because the thing about the Eventbrite import is that it has a set of mapping that counts for across all events that come in. You can't actually say, okay, if it's this type of event, I want you to mark it as a specific program. Sorry, my processing turned off, so I have to turn it back on. So your mappings are very static. You can't change your mappings per type of event. You just set them up across the board. So in general, Eventbrite has its own set of objects that it imports things into out of the box. If you don't want to do any mapping to custom or into Salesforce objects or into your own custom objects, you don't have to. You could use Eventbrite out of the box just by using their import objects. And basically it brings in an event, and in that event there are orders, and each of those orders has buyers, and if you have attendees, if you collect attendee information, You can collect attendee information, and all of this could live just in these objects, and you could deal with them in these objects. I have had people choose that because they don't want their tickets to roll up to NPSP totals anyway. They don't care. It's just about getting people in the door. They leave everything in Eventbrite objects. But for most folks, that probably won't work. So there is, in fact, a second step called processing, by which you can map if they first come into these objects, and then on a schedule or with a click, you can configure mappings that say, okay, take all the data that's in these custom objects and move it over into my standard or my own personal custom objects. And this is the interface for mapping. It's a little clunky in terms of UI. They changed it a while ago with the new version, and I don't understand why. But you basically, you can choose what type of object it becomes, and this is where you have it can become any object in the database, but most people would put events into campaigns. Your attendees, you would assume, would become contacts, but you can choose leads. You can choose their record type, and then you have some mapping you can do. You can map basic fields, text to text, numbers to numbers. You can map lookup to help do some make sure your contacts are being attached to their the buyers being attached as a lookup on contact fields. You can map some static values, but again, keep in mind that this is across every event. So for this organization that I'm demoing, they have regions and entities. They are a C3, C4 pack, and they have multiple regions. So what I had to do was actually build some automation that would, after the fact, go look at like the name of the campaign they created and a field on the campaign and turn everyone into the right region and right entity. And it's all done with Flow and Process Builder after the fact. So it's not actually, I can't build it into Eventbrite. So if you want to get fancy with your sync, it takes some post-processing of everything pretty much. But other than that, after struggling with it and getting the post-processing to work and managing to understand when what errors mean, it has worked pretty consistently. It hasn't had any problems. Every release, I bite my nails a little bit because there is no support for it. So the other option, of course, is middleware. Zapier has an integration. I don't know if Workato does, but you can use triggers using middleware to sync some of these platforms. I don't know which platforms offer. You'd have to do some searching, or maybe Kalman and TJ know. But you can trigger things in Eventbrite to send data to Salesforce via Zapier. And you then, using the Zapier tool, you can do all sorts of custom mapping to a point. You have some limitations there, but it's becoming a more and more powerful tool. Zapier is over time. They've been making it enterprise lately. So I haven't been tracking questions, Caroline. I don't know if there's any.
That's fine. Let's just pick out. Katie was asking just about, and leads to a question from Elizabeth, again about this sort of matching with existing contacts or creating duplicates.
Sure. Yeah, the matching in Eventbrite. Let's go to. I believe it's under buyers. Is very simple. It is email only. Yeah, I don't think you even have an option to choose what to map on. It is just straight email matching. So as Katie,
some clients have actually.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Katie's point is really good.
Yes, Katie's point was that it's overwriting data then if spouses are using the same email. And then carry on, TJ.
Yeah, some clients have found that even with exact email matches, the Eventbrite tool will still create some random duplicates.
Yep.
Same email, but so you may have to do some more vigorous deduping. With the Eventbrite app, I usually tell clients, like, well, let's start with the Eventbrite app since it's free and it works some of the time. If we find it bugs out, let's try Zapier or some other middleman tool. And if that doesn't work, we'll have to do the export import or some other process. But it does work, but sometimes it will just stop or bug out or create lots of duplicates. It's not consistent and it's work.
One option that I've had we've done is use this app to do the import so that it stops, it doesn't process them into its own objects. And then they use some very simple, like they had an awesome admin and they used some very simple flow to move data over into contacts themselves. Like they built the match themselves, and they wanted to do that. They like to tinker instead of doing it in Zapier and paying for Zapier. Zapier can be almost free, or even free, depending on how low your usage of it is. So if you only have a couple events, Zapier might be a great option, and you want to learn Zapier. But this worked for them, where they used the import process, which I've never had that break. It's always the processing that breaks. So to get the data into these custom object, or into these, almost scratch objects, and then did their own processing after with just flow and things to make simple opportunities and check for contact dupes and things of that nature. And it worked pretty well for them. So that's another option. And that would be totally free, like puppies, because you have to build it.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. That's what we did for CVent, and I think sometimes we forget that when you have an application that you're not really bound to it. You can do things like send it to a custom object and then build scheduled jobs, daily, nightly, or hourly, whatever it is, to control exactly what you're matching on. And of course there's the buy versus, because for example, CVent, Click and Pledge has a lot of those matching rules in place, but you don't. I'm sorry, but you don't have control over the payment gateway, for example. So going the Eventbrite route, controlling it, and then doing custom code to parse out your data appropriately may be a really good pairing. Or like people are saying, Workato and Zapier.
And that's the thing to think about is if you had to, the nice thing about something like Zapier versus building your own API, doing your own API callouts and using webhooks, like Eventbrite has webhooks, you could use those, is the things you get for using something like Zapier are pretty intense logging, right? You get to see every data in, data out for every step in Zapier. You get pretty good error logging. Like you get things on top of just the integration that if you had to build in Salesforce would be rather expensive. So sometimes we go with Zapier even on big integration projects because to do the couple of things we need to do with an API, middleware offers all these extra features that are worth paying for, because the technical debt of keeping up your own logging and your own, batch jobs and things can get expensive. So it's something to consider. I love that solution, Kalman, that you guys sort of did a middle ground between using everything from their sync versus processing some of it on your own.
But we also have 3 dedicated developers, so
that's true. Yes.
And just to clarify, and I want to kind of move on in a moment. The thing about the Eventbrite integrations is they aren't built by Eventbrite itself. That's one of the problems, isn't it? So Eventbrite, the company, is not going to really help you with the Salesforce integration. They've asked other people to build them.
Right, and when you're at Dreamforce, you could go over to the party that what are they called? Science. They're the big firm that hosts the puzzle party every year at Dreamforce. They built the integration. They wear lab coats at their booth. Anyway, Code Science, maybe it's called. CRM Science, thank you. They built the integration, and then sort of Eventbrite stopped paying for them to manage it, and they would actually like to keep it up. They like it, and they think it would be useful. So we have to keep pushing Eventbrite has to keep hearing that this is a need, or they're not going to support it. So if you're really interested in staying on Eventbrite, I would reach out to Eventbrite and just log yet another request that they keep this thing up to date. Of course, keeping these kinds of things up to date is not cheap. So I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I'm all for community organizing.
So I'm not leaving you very much time, TJ, but there was one other thing that that certainly you mentioned, which is another route that you can go, which is to essentially kind of do your own thing. And so do you just want to talk briefly about, forms and what you might do, how you might do your own thing?
Yeah, so in that initial Excel spreadsheet that we saw in the very beginning, you'll see tools like FormStack or FormSite or FormAssembly, where maybe one of these add-on tools isn't what you need. You need something very specific. You already have your own custom objects, or you're already using campaign members, and you just need to be able to have an online way to capture that. you can use one of these online tools like FormStack, FormAssembly to create the form, and then on the back end, create whatever objects you need it to talk to. Have it update and create the contact. You can make that match criteria as simple or as complex as you want it to be. Then if you're using campaign memberships, look up to see if a campaign membership exists, update it. If not, create it. Create an opportunity for the payment record. If you have a custom object to track tickets, talk to that all on the back end of the form using a Salesforce integration. For FormAssembly, I don't know how good the other tools are. FormAssembly has a really great pre-fill option where not using the URL or anything like that, where before the form loads, it will talk to Salesforce, pull in any information that it needs based on an ID or something that you push to the URL that maybe they're already signed up and you want them to say, oh, yes, I want to register for that. I said I would, and now I want to pay for it. So I can upload, and it can pre-populate all of your contact information, so they don't have to fill that out. But you can build those online forms with one of these tools and have some pretty complex integration with Salesforce because you're setting it how it defines and talks to Salesforce. And you can have it talk to as many objects in the background as you need. And that's one route that a lot of my clients will go to because they already have that form for something else. And it can capture the money aspect and talk to multiple objects. So that might also be a good solution depending on what your needs are and your existing resources.
There's just one small point that I find is kind of some of my clients' hope that these solutions would have is they're not as good at the sort of whole kind of reminder business. You know, if you have Eventbrite, you get this sort of, here are your tickets for the event, and then you can set it that there's an email reminder that the event's coming up and that sort of thing. And the issue, of course, if you do that in FormAssembly is kind of you've got to think of all those things and build them yourselves, haven't you? Because it's not just going to happen unless you think about how are you going to send people confirmations and how are you going to remind them that something's coming up and that sort of thing.
Exactly. You really have to think through the process. Like I like to tell my clients, if you don't have someone technical and who's going to be on top of these things, use a tool like Classy or Soapbox that it's really hard to break. It's really easy to use. It's hard to break. So the non-techies can use it. But if you have a lot of complex needs and have someone with the skills to do the work and build these forms, it can be a great resource. But you really need to think it through of what emails need to go out. What data do you actually need to connect? Okay, what automations do we need to build in Salesforce or reminder emails? So you really have to think that process through. It's 100% manual, and so you have to do all of that strategy stuff because there's nothing doing it automatically for you.
Okay, so Elizabeth, we're running short on time, and as always, we've got far too many things to talk about. But I like Elizabeth's question as a way to wrap up. So she said, "Is there one of these event management tools that you'd recommend the most?" So let's start with the panel, and then if anyone wants to put in chat, TJ, what's your favorite of this, or what would you recommend?
I'm going to have one of those non-answers of it really depends on the client and the need.
No, answered like a true consultant. There you go.
For the smaller orgs that like if they don't have anyone techie, Soapbox is great because it's hard to break and it's cheap. Classy at the same time if you're going to be using other things. It's hard to break. It's not so cheap. If you're more complex, going the more complicated customized routes. So it really depends on the need. I don't like to push new people to Click and Pledge because it is, or Lindio because they're such beasts. If they're already using it, great, but they're just so, yes.
Okay, all right. Barbara, what direction would you take people?
I'm similar, small events. I think Soapbox, do note that Soapbox has a little bit of setup, but their instructions are pretty good. It's not just like a plug and play. There are some like things you have to do, fields you have to make and things. And unless that's changed since I installed it several years ago. And then for big events, I actually like click and pledge. I am not as offended by large numbers of objects as some people are.
Okay.
I ignore what I don't need to look at. I would say because of its other integrations, it also is I think the only one that integrates with auctions for Salesforce. Is that true?
There's that and
so
IATS, yes, and it's
Oh,
debatable whether it really integrates, but
okay. I've not
integration in quotation marks like we've done with others.
Right.
Okay, great.
And then Classy is the prettiest, but I actually find Classy to not be perfect integration. I personally have discovered 5 bugs in Classy in the last integration I tried to build. So I'm a bug finder, but it was a little much.
All right, Kalman, where would you go?
Gosh, I would say cela dépend de toi. It depends on you in my almost bad French, but yeah, it's really tough. I think I really like what Soapbox has done in terms of native functionality. I try to stay native to the platform, and I think that's a great product to start with. If you're doing very complicated multi-day events, that's maybe not where you're going to go. But again, the full-blown something like CVent is generally not reachable for a lot of mid-size or smaller nonprofits. Click and Pledge I haven't seen in a while, but anyway, it really depends on your requirements and how much you're willing to spend and manage it and maintain it.
Fabulous. That's really great. And in chat, we're getting, yes, people who are, we've definitely got some votes in here for Click and Pledge in terms of the kind of the value and the support for it. Yes, people have talked about Classy. Lisa, who's considering going to Eventbrite from a custom solution. So great, absolutely. Thank you very much for the comments and things. Please, I'm going to wrap up the session now, but please keep the conversation going. Come into the office hours group in the Power of Us Hub, or there is also an event management group, which I know I tagged as well. So these are great places to keep this conversation going. And I see a lot of you are looking at the sheet and the comparisons. So thank you, Ashima, for getting that started. And please, as you have experience of these event management apps, please help to keep this sheet up to date, because it will continue to be a valuable resource if everybody puts their information and experience into it. So thank you very much indeed, the panel. This has been great information, and thank you very much for taking the time and for sharing it. We will be back next week with another topic, office hours. We're talking